He was born a slave. Disease crippled his leg. An emperor banished him. And yet 2,000 years later, presidents, prisoners, and navy pilots still turn to his words when their lives fall apart. This is the story of Epictetus, the slave who outsmarted Rome. Around the year 50 AD, in the Greek city of Hierapolis, a boy was born into slavery. We don't know the name his mother gave him. History only remembers what others called him, Epictetus. In Greek, it simply means acquired property. Think about that for a moment. The man who would teach emperors how to be free didn't even own his own name. As a boy, he was sold and brought to Rome, into the household of a man named Epictetus, a former slave himself, who had clawed his way up to become secretary to the Emperor Nero. Rome at the time was the richest, most powerful, and most dangerous city on earth. Fortunes were made overnight, and lives ended just as quickly. Nero's court was a theater of flattery, paranoia, and sudden executions. And at the very bottom of this glittering machine stood a boy whose entire legal existence amounted to one word: acquired. Somewhere in those Roman years, Epictetus lost the use of one leg. Later legend loved to blame a cruel master. It made for a dramatic story. But the most sober source we have gives a quieter, harder explanation: disease. Most likely rheumatism. No accident, no villain, just a slave's body giving way, in a city where a slave's pain counted for very little. There was no single dramatic moment. The pain arrived, stayed, and slowly took the leg. And the work, of course, went on. Here is what makes that worth dwelling on. In everything Epictetus later taught, every lecture his students wrote down, he never once complains about it. Not one line of self-pity survives. The clearest thing he ever said about his own body is almost shockingly practical. Lameness is an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. Think about how strange that is. A lame slave, in the most brutal city on earth, calmly drawing a line down the middle of his life. My body, they can own it, work it, wear it down. My judgment, my response, my will, that belongs to me. Entirely. Unconditionally. That inner fortress was his. And no one in Rome, not his master, not even the emperor, had a key to it. Something remarkable happened next. Epictetus, the man who owned him, allowed his slave to attend lectures. Perhaps he saw the boy was brilliant, and a clever slave was a valuable slave. Whatever his reasons, Epictetus was permitted to study under Musonius Rufus, the most respected Stoic teacher in Rome. Musonius did not do inspirational speeches. His classroom was more like a surgery. One student later recalled that listening to him felt like being accused. He made you see your own weaknesses so precisely that you left the room determined to change. Epictetus absorbed everything. And notice the irony. The free citizens of Rome sat in that classroom worrying about their careers, their rivals, their reputations, slaves to 1,000 anxieties. Next to them sat an actual slave, learning, sentence by sentence, how to become the freest man in the city. Stoicism, for Epictetus, was never an intellectual hobby. It was survival equipment. Every doctrine was tested against a life that had already included the auction block and a crippled leg. That is what gives his teaching its unmistakable tone, dry, sharp, utterly without self-pity. At some point after Nero's death, Epictetus was freed. He was perhaps in his late teens or 20s. And here his story takes a turn that tells you everything about the man. He had seen the inside of the imperial machine. He was educated, connected, formidable in argument. He could have chased money, status, influence, the standard Roman dream. Instead, he chose a small room, a straw mat, a simple lamp, and he began to teach. He owned so little that when someone stole his iron lamp, he shrugged and replaced it with one made of clay. A thief, he joked, had paid more for that lamp than it was worth. He had traded his honesty for it. Then, around the year 93, the axe fell. The Emperor Domitian, suspicious, as tyrants always are, of people who cannot be frightened, banished all philosophers from Rome. Epictetus, once dragged to Rome in chains, now walked out of it a free man, exiled for the crime of teaching people how to think. Rome had thrown him away twice. Watch what he does with it. He crossed the sea to Nicopolis, in Greece, and founded a school. And something extraordinary happened. The world came to him. Students sailed from every corner of the empire. Wealthy Romans sent their sons. Even the future Emperor Hadrian is said to have counted him a friend. The lame ex-slave had become, by many accounts, the most sought-after teacher in the Roman world. What did he teach them? Not theory for its own sake. He opened with the sentence that still stands at the head of his handbook. Some things are in our power, and others are not. Our opinions, our aims, our desires, our responses, ours. Our body, our property, our reputation, what others do and say, not ours. And then the conclusion he hammered home, lesson after lesson, confuse those two categories, and you will spend your entire life anxious, resentful, and enslaved, whatever your legal status. Keep them straight, and no one can truly harm you. His students didn't get comfort, they got drills. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. He told them. Your colleague insults you? The insult is not up to you, your response is. You lose your fortune? The loss is not up to you, what you do next is. Epictetus never wrote a single word of it down. Everything we have exists because one devoted student, Arian, took notes. Notes that became the Discourses and the little handbook, the Enchiridion. A slave's spoken words, scribbled down by a student, have now outlived the Roman Empire itself. And those words traveled further than any legion. Half a century after his death, the most powerful man alive, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, sat in his tent on the Danube frontier, writing private notes to himself. Among his greatest debts, he names the borrowed copy of Epictetus's lectures. Read the Meditations today, and you can hear the old teacher's voice on every page. The Emperor of Rome, taking orders from a slave. 17 centuries later, an American fighter pilot named James Stockdale was shot down over Vietnam. As he parachuted into 7.5 years of imprisonment and torture, he said to himself, I'm leaving the world of technology and entering the world of Epictetus. He credited the lame slave of Hierapolis with getting him, and many of his fellow prisoners, out alive, minds intact. The pattern repeats, generation after generation. When everything is stripped away, freedom, health, comfort, certainty, people reach for Epictetus. Because he is the one philosopher who cannot be accused of speaking from a comfortable armchair. He earned every sentence. So what do we take from all this, those of us who will never be slaves in Rome or prisoners of war? One single practice. Tonight, or tomorrow morning, take the thing that is currently gnawing at you. Name it precisely. Then ask one question, the question Epictetus asked about everything. Is this in my power, or not? If it is, your effort, your words, your next step, then stop worrying and act on it. If it is not, the outcome, the past, another person's opinion, then practice setting it down, deliberately, the way Epictetus set down his stolen lamp. That's it. One question, applied daily. It made a slave freer than an emperor. If this story stayed with you, the next one cuts deeper. Seneca, the richest man in Rome, exiled to a barren rock in the sea, and what he wrote there. Subscribe so you don't miss it.